Jefferson was among the most radical revolutionaries in Virginia, and I'm sure a lot of you know this story. And when he was part of that group in Williamsburg who was advocating basically the beginnings of revolution, word got to Britain, and Lord Dunmore had sent a letter explaining what was happening. And a British official wrote back, and he wrote, "The madness of the people of Virginia exceeds all bounds." They could not understand what this man Jefferson and his colleagues were up to, because Virginia, the largest and most powerful colony in their eyes, was so tied in many ways to England, culturally, socially, economically. It was going to be the bastion of support. Whatever that state of Massachusetts or colony of Massachusetts was up to, Virginia was going to be the bulwark, and they didn't have to worry because there was so much at stake here. But as you all know, the story of Jefferson, this is not the story of my book, but you know the background as to why the revolution occurred. And when Jefferson did author that declaration, he said that perhaps there'd be 3 months following to be concerned about what would happen next. Would the people follow the revolution, or would they become loyalists, and so forth? So those 3 months occurred. My events pick up almost 5 years later. So if you turn the clock forward from 1776, and it's December of 1780. Thank you. It's December of 1780, and Jefferson is in his second one-year term as the governor of Massachusetts. Yeah. I've used that phrase so many times in my career as a reporter for the Boston Globe that without thinking it slips off my lips. Written many stories, the governor, the senator, the governor of Virginia, the great state of Virginia. Jefferson is in a townhouse on a hill in Richmond, and he's there with his wife, Martha, and their 3 young children. In fact, just recently, a baby named Lucy has been born, and Jefferson has recently paid a midwife for the birth of that child, and they're at the townhouse, and Jefferson has no idea of what's happening to the north. So to put this in context, Benedict Arnold in the summer of 1780 has turned traitor. And there have been 2 brief invasions into Virginia, one during the governorship of Patrick Henry and one during the governorship of Thomas Jefferson, and both have been very brief. The British had come sort of like tourists. They'd stayed on the coast, they looked around, they took some prizes back, and that was it. So Thomas Jefferson believed that was what was going to happen again. But he did write that were the British foolish enough to invade again, that there'd be little the Virginians could do to stop them, because the Virginia Navy, in Jefferson's view, was basically worthless. It had been denuded by the 2 previous invasions, and there really was no way to stop a great British fleet. But he had no way of knowing if that fleet was on its way. So what happened with Benedict Arnold? And this is a very important part of the story, understanding why what happened eventually here at Monticello occurred. Benedict Arnold, as you know, tried to take West Point and perhaps George Washington himself. That failed at the last minute when a Confederate was captured. Arnold went to the Hudson River where there was a ship called the Vulture, and he then escaped to New York. And he met with the British general there, Clinton. And over time, they developed a very wise plan in their view. And that plan was to go to Virginia and not just stay as a tourist, but to cut off the supply line to the south. The thinking being, and it makes a lot of sense if you look back at it, that if they could seize the arms depots all around Virginia, they could stop the continual line of supplies and men that was going to the Carolinas, and that Lord Cornwallis, who was fighting there for the British, was constantly complaining about. So cut off Virginia, and maybe you could turn the war entirely to the British, certainly in the South. So it made a lot of sense. In December of 1780, Benedict Arnold takes command of a fleet of 27 ships with 1,600 men, and they set sail for the South. George Washington, who had sent a spy in hopes of capturing Arnold, but that plan failed, and I write about that in detail in the book. He knew that there was a fleet heading somewhere to the south. He did not know where it was headed. He did not have any idea if it was going to Virginia, and many times he had sent warnings to Thomas Jefferson saying, a fleet is heading southward. We don't know if they're coming to Virginia, but if they do invade Virginia, I have great confidence that the men of Virginia will show the courage to stop this invasion fleet. Jefferson would receive these warnings, call men out, and then time and again there was a false alarm. So that sets the stage a little bit as to what's happening. In late December of 1780, Arnold's fleet heads further south. It's a hard gale, Arnold later writes his superiors, and ships containing 400 men are separated at sea. They're not found for many, many, many days after the invasion fleet reaches Virginia. Another ship that has 100 horses, half of the horses have to be sent overboard because the storms are so rough and they need to keep the ship in balance. Other ships with great cannons and armaments, also, they send some of their cannons and arms overboard to keep the ships afloat. The officers on many of these ships have been given what's called a letter of rendezvous, because the British did not want even the chance of a secret leaking out as to where they were heading. Some officers obviously knew, but a lot of others on ships did not know. So the day came towards the very end of December 1780 when the officers were told to open that letter of rendezvous, and the assignment was to meet at the Capes of Virginia. So they've come all this way down, and during this entire time, Governor Jefferson in Richmond does not know that there's a fleet headed south. At the very end of 1780, the ships are assembled in Chesapeake Bay, and they learn their mission, and that is basically Arnold wants to go up the James River. Now you have to realize, if you look at his instructions were to seize arms depots, to go to Portsmouth. He wasn't specifically told, go to Richmond and seize Jefferson, but Arnold, this is his chance. He wants to make his mark, and so he decides pretty quickly that's what he wants to do. And of course, Jefferson and Arnold knew well of each other. Jefferson had written earlier, when Arnold was on the American side, that Arnold was a, quote, fine sailor. And he had invested great hopes in Arnold time and again that Arnold would be a key towards winning the Revolutionary War. Of course, he heard that Arnold became a traitor and was aghast. Jefferson is in Richmond. As the ships are in the bay, there is a sailor named James Barron of the very small Virginia Navy. He's on a very small ship called the Liberty. And James Barron looks up, and he describes it later as seeing 27 sail, 27 great ships. He doesn't know, because it's late in the day, he's at a distance, he doesn't want to get too close if it's the enemy, if they're British. But of course the suspicion is there. He quickly goes to shore, and a message is given to a person who will go on horseback to the governor in Richmond. And the message warns that there's 27 sail in the bay, they seem to be headed up towards Richmond, we don't know exactly what they are. That night, messengers go in 40-mile increments by horseback to take the message to Governor Jefferson in Richmond. The next morning, it's about 8 o'clock, and Jefferson, even though it's the middle of winter, is in his garden outside the townhouse. And the weary messenger ascends the hill and delivers this message to Jefferson that there is a fleet, unknown origin, in the bay. Jefferson looks at it, and he doesn't know what to do. He is concerned that if he just assumes it's British and calls everyone out, that it will be another false alarm. So in his mind, it's a very wise thing to ask for more information. He tells men to go out and get some more information. And it's a long way back, of course, from Richmond to the bay. It's about 100 miles. So the men go out, they try to get the information. While that's happening, Arnold's fleet is slowly going up the James River. Now, let me pause here because this is a very important point. A lot has not been known about the first couple of days of this invasion. We know that Jefferson is unaware, but what was going on with Arnold's fleet? It's basically a blank slate. So what I did as a reporter is I wanted to find out more. Is there any information about some of the men on these ships? So I got a hold of the ship's logs of these ships from the British National Archives, and I compared that with lists of all sorts of journals, letters, anything we could find that told us a little bit more about men who might have been on those ships. And there are a lot of men on the ships, but a few of them did keep journals. Those journals aren't typically known as Virginia journals, but they may have written a page or two. So from those page or two, I was able to say, okay, there are some references here, and there's a couple of officers in particular who wrote in detail about those first couple of days. So for example, one of the British officers wrote that they got off their boats, they were seizing plunder, and one of Arnold's great missions here was for personal gain. And I write in great detail in the book how both the Americans and the British became convinced that Arnold's motivation was financial in a great degree. There are other reasons why, of course, which I explain in the book, but this was time and again clearly one of his great motivations. In fact, he had a secret deal with another leader of the same mission, and they secretly agreed that they, between the two of them, would split the plunder between their forces. So at one point early in this invasion, Arnold sees 4 ships, they have tobacco, and he sends a message to the people on shore saying, help me get these ships off so I can get the tobacco. Very soon at the same time, they go with 300 men into a town where they're concerned that the men in this town will warn Jefferson and Richmond what's happening. And they go, according to this officer, house by house and seize the principal inhabitants from their beds to the deep cries and lamentations of their families. That's the way the British officer described it.